The chandeliers dripped light, a cold, crystalline rain over the sea of black tuxedos and jewel-toned gowns. In the grand ballroom of the Astoria Lux, wealth was the air everyone breathed, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the faint, metallic tang of ambition. Along the far wall, a ghost moved through this gilded world, her presence as quiet and unnoticed as a shift in barometric pressure. Lena Washington, 31 years old, pushed a mop across a small spill of champagne, her dark blue cleaning uniform a void in the glittering spectacle. Her movements were a study in economy. Each sweep precise, her body a coiled spring of disciplined energy, even in the mundane task. She kept her eyes down, focused on the swirling patterns the mop left on the marble, a temporary art that would evaporate in seconds. This was her world now, the periphery, the shadows, the quiet labor that allowed such opulence to seem effortless. From the corner of her eye, she could see the room's gravitational center, a man and a woman. Mr. Minjun Kwan stood like a sculpture carved from granite and silence, his stillness a source of immense power that bent the room around him. Beside him, his wife, Sohee, was a slash of crimson, a vibrant, predatory flower in a blood-red dress. Her laughter was sharp, a sound that demanded and received attention. Guests orbited them, their smiles bright and brittle, their deference a tangible currency. Lena saw the invisible lines of this ecosystem, the rigid hierarchy that placed the woman in the red dress at the apex and herself, the cleaner, at the absolute bottom, a necessary but unseen component of the grand machine. She was used to being invisible. In another life, she had craved it. Here, it was simply a condition of employment. The delicate symphony of the gala faltered on a single, clumsy note. A young waiter, his face slick with the sweat of anxiety, navigated the dense crowd with a tray of wine glasses. He swerved to avoid a laughing guest, and his elbow connected with Sohee Kwan. It was barely a bump, but a single drop of ruby liquid leaped from a glass and stained the bodice of her red dress, a darker spot on the perfect silk. The music did not stop, but a pocket of silence instantly formed around the Kwans. Every eye in their orbit swiveled to the scene. Sohee's smile didn't just vanish. It was surgically removed, replaced by a mask of cold fury. Mr. Kwan, however, remained impassive, his gaze shifting from his wife's dress to the waiter's terrified face with the dispassionate curiosity of a biologist studying a trapped insect. "You clumsy idiot." Sohee's voice was low, yet it carried across the sudden stillness with chilling clarity. It was not the volume, but the venom that commanded the space. She didn't want an apology. She wanted a sacrifice. The boy, no older than 19, stammered, his apologies tumbling over one another. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Kwan. It was an accident," so he let his words hang in the air and die. She looked him up and down, her lip curled in disgust. "An accident? Your incompetence is an insult." From her station by the wall, Lena watched, the handle of the mop growing cold in her hands. She recognized the predator toying with its prey. It was a universal language spoken in boardrooms, back alleys, and apparently in ballrooms. The boy's humiliation was the evening's entertainment, a cruel little play for the bored and powerful. The tension was a wire-pulled taut, vibrating with the unspoken threat of what a man like Min Jun Kwan could do to a boy who had displeased his wife. So he was not finished. The waiter's frantic bowing and apologies were not enough to soothe her wounded pride. She craved a deeper submission. "Do you know how much this dress costs? It is more than you will make in a year of sloshing drinks for your betters." She took a step closer, forcing him to shrink back. The crowd watched, a silent, captive audience. Some faces showed a flicker of pity, quickly suppressed. Most were transfixed by the raw display of power. "On your knees," so he commanded. The words were quiet, but they landed like a physical blow. The waiter froze, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror. A murmur went through the crowd. This was too far, even for them, yet no one dared to intervene. "I said," so he repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "On your knees." Now a cold, familiar fire ignited in Lena's gut. It was the feeling that had undone her before, a visceral reaction to injustice, to the casual cruelty of the strong feasting on the weak. She straightened up slowly, her spine aligning with a remembered discipline. The mop handle rested against the wall. She took a single, deliberate step away from the shadows. That's enough. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a strange density, cutting through the strained silence and reaching every ear in the vicinity. Every head turned. The cleaner. The ghost. So he spun around, her expression a mixture of shock and derision. "What did you say?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. Lena met her gaze without flinching, her own eyes dark and steady. "I said, that's enough. He's just a kid. Let him go for a moment." So he seemed too stunned to speak. Then, a sharp, ugly laugh escaped her lips. The sheer audacity was amusing. She glided towards Lena, circling her, her red dress flowing around her like blood in water. She appraised Lena's frame, the strong shoulders and solid build hidden beneath the shapeless uniform. "You," she sneered. "Want to play the hero? A cleaner?" She gestured to the open space on the dance floor, a malicious idea blooming on her face. "You think you're tough? Fine. Let's see how tough you really are. I challenge you. A boxing match. Right here, right now." A shocked, excited gasp rippled through the ballroom. The proposition was absurd, a fever dream born of arrogance and champagne. But so he was serious. Her eyes gleamed with the thrill of this new, more exciting form of humiliation. Lena didn't answer immediately. She stood perfectly still, a calm island in the churning sea of expectation. The crowd anticipated a stammered apology, a fearful retreat. They saw nothing of the sort. Lena's gaze drifted past Sohee's triumphant face to the silent, watchful figure of her husband. Mr. Kwan's expression was unreadable, but as Lena held his gaze, he gave a single, infinitesimal nod. It was not permission. It was a test, an allowance. He was curious to see how this unexpected variable would resolve itself. With that silent acknowledgement, Lena's decision was made. She turned her attention back to Sohee. Slowly, she began to unbutton the front of her blue uniform shirt. The movements were methodical, almost ritualistic. She wasn't just removing a piece of clothing. She was shedding a skin. She shrugged the shirt off her shoulders, revealing a plain black t-shirt underneath. Then, she began to roll up her sleeves, her motions precise and unhurried. As the fabric climbed her arms, the crowd saw them. The muscles of her forearms were not the soft, undefined limbs of a laborer. They were dense, corded bands of sinew, sculpted by thousands of hours of punishing, repetitive impact. They were the arms of a fighter. Her entire posture shifted. Her feet, clad in worn, rubber-soled work shoes, adjusted on the polished marble, finding a natural, balanced stance. Her shoulders, freed from the confining uniform, seemed to broaden. The amusement in the onlookers' eyes began to curdle into confusion, then a dawning intrigue. This was not the frightened servant they had expected. Sohee, drunk on her own power, saw the physical transformation but dismissed it as pathetic posturing. "Ready to be put in your place?" she mocked, a cruel smile playing on her lips. Lena said nothing. She simply finished rolling her sleeves and let her hands fall to her sides, waiting. Sohee, who had likely spent a few weekends in a trendy cardio boxing class, adopted what she thought was a formidable fighting stance. She raised her fists awkwardly near her face, her designer heels a terrible anchor on the slick floor. She was playing a part, the dominant warrior queen, for her audience. With a sharp exhalation, she threw a wild, looping right hand aimed at Lena's head. It was a telegraphed, clumsy blow, powered more by ego than technique. Lena didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She didn't even raise her hands to block. In a liquid motion of impossible subtlety, she simply shifted her head about 2 inches to her left. The punch, carrying all of Sohee's forward momentum, sliced through the air where her face had just been, whistling past her ear with a faint rush of displaced air. The sheer economy of the movement was breathtaking. It was an act of profound, almost insulting, control. Sohee, having thrown her weight into a punch that met nothing but atmosphere, stumbled forward, her balance broken. She caught herself before she fell, but her grace was shattered. A collective gasp, sharp and involuntary, swept the room. Mr. Kwan's eyes, which had been hooded and bored, sharpened with a flicker of genuine interest. Lena remained rooted to her spot, a study in absolute stillness. Her hands were still down, relaxed at her sides. She hadn't offered a single offensive or defensive gesture, yet she was in total command. Is that all? Lena's voice was low, devoid of mockery. It was a simple, honest question, which only made it more devastating. The question hung in the air, stripping away the last of Sohi's theatrical bravado. Humiliation burned on her cheeks. Enraged, she lunged again, abandoning any pretense of form. She became a flurry of red silk and flailing limbs, a chaotic whirlwind of slaps and poorly aimed punches. Lena became a ghost. She didn't back away. She moved with her, within the storm, a slight turn of the shoulder here, a dip of the knees there, a half step, a subtle pivot. Sohi's fists met empty space again and again. Lena was an untouchable phantom, her dark, simple clothes a stark contrast to the frantic, useless rage of the woman in red. This was no longer a fight. It was a lesson. Sohi's frantic assault slowed, her lungs burning. The elegant dress was now creased, her carefully styled hair falling in disarray around her face. Her rage was dissolving into a gasping, desperate frustration, and beneath that, a seed of cold, dawning horror. She was making a fool of herself. She was losing. The cleaner wasn't fighting back. She was simply allowing her to fail. Lena decided the demonstration was over. As Sohi swung a final, exhausted blow, Lena moved. It was the first time her hands came up. Her left hand rose, not in a block, but to gently cup Sohi's incoming wrist, halting its momentum with impossible ease. Her right hand came to rest on Sohi's shoulder, the touch light, almost delicate. There was no violence in the contact, no aggression. But in that simple, two-point hold, there was absolute finality. Sohi was immobilized, held fast by a strength that was as quiet as it was immovable. She struggled for a second, pushing against Lena's grip, but it was like trying to move a statue bolted to the floor. The power reversal was complete and devastatingly public. The entire ballroom was held in a state of suspended animation, the silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. Lena leaned in, her lips close to Sohi's ear, her voice a low whisper meant only for her. Power isn't the dress you wear or the man you married. It's what you can do when all of that is stripped away. Lena paused, letting the words sink in. And right now, stripped away, you are nothing. She released her grip. Sohi stumbled backward, catching her heel on the marble and nearly falling. Her face was a canvas of shock, fury, and a humiliation so profound it was visceral. The social hierarchy of the room had not just been challenged, it had been inverted and shattered in less than a minute. Across the floor, Mr. Minjun Kwan watched, his face a mask of stone. But his eyes, fixed on Lena, held a new light. It was the look of a man who had just discovered a rare and dangerous artifact in a place he never expected to find one. Without another word, Lena turned her back on the scene. She walked calmly to the wall, the crowd parting for her as if she were royalty. She picked up her folded uniform shirt, methodically unrolled the sleeves of her t-shirt, and slipped the blue button-down on. Her movements were just as they were before, economical, disciplined, quiet. She was a cleaner again. But everyone in the room saw her differently now. She was a ghost who had shown her form, and the memory of it would haunt this space. She clocked out and left the building, the cool night air a balm on her skin. The next morning, her supervisor called. She was fired, of course. A formal, regretful termination for inappropriate conduct, but when she went to pick up her final paycheck, the envelope was heavy. Inside was not just her due wages, but a cashier's check for $50,000. It wasn't severance. It was a message. A question. In his penthouse office, Minjun Kwan looked at the preliminary report on his desk. He was a man who detested surprises, a master of a world built on calculated risks and known quantities. The cleaning lady was an unknown, and he could not tolerate that. Find out who she is. He had commanded his most trusted aide. The investigation was swift and efficient. The aide returned hours later, placing a thin file on the polished mahogany. Inside were old newspaper clippings, faded promotional posters, and links to grainy, low-resolution videos from 5 years ago. Her name is Lena Washington, the aide reported, his voice neutral. But that's not who she was. In the ring, they called her the Ghost, undefeated welterweight champion of the world. 27 fights, 27 wins, 20 knockouts. He slid a photo across the desk. It showed a younger Lena, her face bruised and swollen but her eyes blazing, a championship belt slung over her shoulder. She retired 5 years ago, abruptly, after her last title defense against Maria, the Hammer Flores. She put Flores in a coma for 3 days. They said she could have killed her. Washington vacated the title, paid Flores's medical bills with her winnings, and disappeared. Mr. Kwan looked at the photo, then back at his aide. She walked away from it all? Yes, sir. It seems she was afraid. Not of her opponents. She was afraid of herself now, he understood. The impossible calm. The absolute control. The refusal to strike. It wasn't weakness. It was the restraint of a predator who knows the devastating power of its own teeth and claws. So-hee Kwan did not share her husband's newfound respect. She was trapped in a prison of her own making, her name now a punchline in the elite circles she fought so hard to dominate. The story of the cleaner who had effortlessly humbled her spread like wildfire. Her authority was gone, replaced by whispers and mocking smiles. She demanded that her husband exact revenge, that he crush this woman who had dared to defy her. But Min Jun was intrigued, not angered. He saw in Lena a discipline that mirrored his own, albeit in a different arena. He forbade any action against her. She has earned her peace, he stated, a declaration that felt like a betrayal to his wife. So-hee's power had always been derivative, a reflection of her husband's. With his refusal to act, she felt that power slipping away even within her own marriage. Consumed by rage and a desperate need to reclaim her status, she decided to act on her own. She bypassed her husband's top enforcers and used a pair of lower-level thugs, men whose loyalty was cheap and whose methods were crude. This wasn't about a fair fight. This was about punishment. A few days later, Lena was walking home from an interview for another cleaning job. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows down the quiet residential street. As she passed an alley, a car screeched to a halt behind her. 2 large men got out, their intentions clear in their aggressive posture. They moved to corner her, blocking her path. The air grew heavy. This was not the ballroom. There was no audience, no rules, no pretense. This was the world she had run from. The first man lunged, reaching for her. In the ballroom, she had evaded. Here she did not. Her left hand shot out, deflecting his arm while her right foot stomped down hard on his kneecap. A wet, cracking sound echoed in the alley, and the man screamed, collapsing. The second man, momentarily stunned, charged forward. Lena pivoted, her body a blur of motion. She didn't throw a punch. She drove her elbow upward into his jaw as he came in. The impact was sickeningly solid. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he crumpled to the pavement, unconscious before he hit the ground. It was over in less than 5 seconds. Brutal, efficient, final. She looked down at the 2 broken men, a cold, familiar sickness rising in her throat. This was the part of herself she had tried to bury. She turned and walked away into the darkness, her stride unbroken. When she got to her small apartment, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. An old, gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "Pops," she said, her own voice tight. "It's Lena. I think I'm in trouble." Min Jun Kwan was a patient man, but his patience had its limits. When he learned of his wife's flagrant disobedience and the spectacular failure of her brutish attempt at revenge, his fury was cold and absolute. The 2 thugs were dealt with in a way that ensured they would never fail or serve anyone again. His wife was confined to their penthouse, stripped of her access to his resources, her powerlessness now a stark and inescapable reality. The dishonor she had brought upon his name had to be cleansed. But this was a delicate matter. Lena Washington was not a common adversary to be crushed. She was a unique force to be understood and neutralized with respect. He did not send more thugs. He sent a black sedan with a polite, impeccably dressed driver, who found Lena as she was leaving her apartment the next day. The driver bowed slightly. "Ms. Washington," he said, his tone deferential. "Mr. Kwan requests the honor of a meeting with you. At your convenience." Lena had spoken at length with Pops Callahan, her old coach. He had listened to the whole story without interruption, his weathered face grim. This Quan, he had said, he's not a street brawler. He's a king. Kings don't like loose cannons in their kingdom, but they respect other sovereigns. You gotta meet him. On your terms. Lena looked at the driver, then at the gleaming car. I'll come, she said. Now, the meeting took place in a sterile office high above the city, the view a breathtaking panorama of lights. There was no one else present, just Minjun Quan, standing by the window, and Lena, who stood near the door. The vast space between them hummed with unspoken tension. Quan turned from the window. Ms. Washington, thank you for coming. He gestured to a chair she did not take. My wife's actions were unsanctioned and have brought me great dishonor. I offer you my sincerest apology. Lena's expression remained unchanged. An apology doesn't fix what she did. She sent men to hurt me. I am aware, Quan said, his voice flat. They have been disciplined. My wife has been disciplined. He walked to his desk and slid a check across its polished surface. The number written on it was astronomical. This is for your trouble. A compensation for the insult. Lena glanced at the check, then met his eyes. I don't want your money, her voice was firm. I want this to be over. I walked away from a world of violence 5 years ago. I buried that part of myself, for a reason. I will not be dragged back into it. Quan studied her, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw not a cleaner or a boxer, but a woman of immense, terrifying self-control. It was the highest virtue in his world. Then what is it you want? He asked, the question genuine. Leave me alone, she said, her words precise and heavy. All of you. And teach your wife a lesson about power. Tell her that the most dangerous people in the world aren't the ones who have everything. They're the ones who have nothing left to lose. It was the final confrontation, not of fists, but of wills. A king of the underworld and a queen in exile. He recognized her sovereignty. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. You have my word. You will not be troubled by me or my house again. Lena left the sterile office and the silent man within it, the city lights spreading out below her like a fallen constellation. She didn't look back. The world of Minjun Quan, with its gilded cages and silent violence, was not hers. She had only ever wanted a quiet life, a peace she had to fight, paradoxically, to maintain. Days later, the familiar, pungent scent of sweat, old leather, and rubbing alcohol filled her senses. She was home. The old community gym was a world away from the Astoria Lux, its paint peeling, its equipment worn and scarred from decades of use. Pops Callahan, his face a roadmap of a long, hard life, expertly wrapped her hands in long strips of white cloth. He worked in silence, his movements practiced and comforting. He didn't ask about the meeting. He didn't need to. The fact that she was here, wrapping her hands, was answer enough. You think he'll keep his word? Pops asked finally, his voice a low gravel as he secured the tape around her wrist. He will, Lena said, flexing her newly wrapped fist. He's a man who understands boundaries. I just had to show him where mine was. She wasn't training for a prize fight. There was no opponent, no purse, no screaming crowd. She was training for herself. She approached the heavy bag, a worn leather cylinder that hung from the ceiling like a silent sentinel. She settled into her stance. The first punch was a jab, a sharp, clean thud that echoed in the cavernous space. Then came another and another. A rhythm began to build. Jab, cross, hook, thud, thud, thwack. It was a kind of meditation, a physical prayer. Each impact was a reclamation of the power she had once feared. It was no longer a weapon to be used against others, but a tool for forging her own inner peace. Her mind went back to the ballroom, to the woman in the red dress. So he saw strength in what she could command, what she could buy, who she could humiliate. The world saw strength in money and status. Lena had learned, the hard way, that true strength was in the opposite. It was in the control to not strike, the discipline to walk away, the courage to be invisible until the moment you could no longer afford to be. The rhythmic drumming of her gloves on the bag was the only sound. It was the sound of a woman finding her balance in a world that sought to knock her down. She was not the ghost, the retired champion. She was not the cleaning lady from the gala. She was Lena. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.